Welcome to BAS 121. We're going to go over Chapter 8 on Predictive Modeling and Analysis. So we've broken it into three key topics. First, we're going to talk about predictive modeling, and we're going to break that down into logic-driven models and data-driven models. And this is more conceptual. Once you get into it, you don't really care whether it's logic-driven or data-driven. But I just want to give it so you contextually have a view of what the difference is. Then we're going to bring into, well, once we have a model, how do we build a degree of uncertainty in that? I mean, obviously, predictive models are based on history and things might change. So we're going to show you how to build in some analysis of uncertainty into your models. Last, we're going to do some modeling with the Analyst solver, which will allow us to do multiple parameters, sensitivity analysis, multiple simulations, etc. Well, let's get right into it, and let's talk about define predictive modeling or predictive analytics. It's we again defined it in the first course, but it's basically short definition. It's how do we use historical data or historical information, take that information, model it, come up with a mathematical model that'll help us predict the future. Now, there's lots of examples. You know, anyone that's gotten a credit card or gone for a mortgage knows that the banking industry has a thing called a FICO score. FICO score predicts the likelihood of me paying back a loan or paying back a credit card. Sales folks use it often for customer relationship management to figure out which customers should I call on, which ones are most likely to buy another product. So can I do cross sales? Can I do up sales? People that have bought this oftentimes buy this. Also allows me to go with the right product. You know, most folks have sales forces out there. An interesting fact, most salespeople can remember or be intimately familiar with a half dozen or so products. So there's a tendency for them to sell the products they know or they're familiar with. Predictive modeling and the sophistication of predictive modeling helps us aid these salespeople to make sure we sell the right products to these customers, which helps maximize the company's revenues and earnings, also helps customer satisfaction. Insurance companies, any of you that have car loans that have or car insurance, lots of things go into predicting that. Your credit card score is one of the things, but obviously if you've had driving violations, that will up your insurance rates. If you've had accidents, etc. Now, before we go on, we ought to talk a little bit about some of the limitations of predictive modeling. First of all, history is a great predictor of the future, but sometimes things and people and events or the underlying factors change. You know, the banking industry thought they had a great FICO score system, but it was horrible in the late 2009, 2010, when unemployment went way up, when the value of people's houses went way down. All of a sudden, the old algorithms, because things had changed, the old FICO score algorithms were horribly outdated and weren't very good. And it wasn't because the analytics that went into them originally weren't correct. It's that things had changed. There may be some unaccounted for variables. I mean, maybe if you think of horse racing, maybe I have a horse doesn't run good in the mud, and all my historical data is that horse not running on a good day. Fourthly, sometimes over time people become familiar with what the equation is and may work to manipulate the scores. Like they might know that college SATs are going to look for a certain thing, and they become familiar, or I learn that the FICO score is going to penalize me if I cancel too many credit cards. So sometimes the equations, as they become more familiar, come out of date. Lots of uses in predictive modeling. It's becoming more and more mainstream because the tools have increased and the amount of data has increased. There are some examples, and there are some of the limitations. So let's talk about predictive modeling, and we're going to start with the logic-based, and then we're going to add on to it. So the key steps are to collect the data, clean it, make sure you've got good data, make sure you've accounted for any outliers and scrub them off. Then develop a model. And then as you get results, make sure you're constantly looking to improve and update your model. So in this chapter, and in this playlist, we will go through a bunch of solved examples, which you have the Excel spreadsheet for. You also have the book that walks you through. Some of the examples is we'll talk about how to know how profitable a customer is to you. How can I model an existing customer? How valuable is it for me to retain a customer? What's the dollar value of that? We'll take a look at a lot of profit margins models. Is it better? Is a 10% reduction in price? Is that going to help me? What's the ideal inventory levels? We'll talk about some time periods, looking over time in the future. What's the proper new product investment? How about hotel or restaurants overbooking? How can we model to see if what's the right volume of overbooking a hotel should do, or the right volume of overbooking a restaurant should do? We'll talk about a little bit of retirement planning. This is applicable to so many things, but we'll go through those solved examples. Then we'll look at data-driven modeling. So the big difference in data is now I've added some substantial data, so now I can do some trend analysis or regression analysis, and we'll show you how in Excel to do a trend line and to look at some different functions, which function best fits my data. Some of the solved examples, we'll be looking at when's the ideal time to give a price discount. Is the ideal time to, and to what level and what volume of price discounting? What's the relationship between price and my demand? How can I use analytics to predict what I think my commodities prices might be? Price of crude oil, price of gas, etc. So that's some of the data-driven stuff. Then we'll get into, well, what do we do about uncertainty? Certainly these predictive models are interesting and nice, but certainly there's a lot of unknowns and there's lots of things that can change. So how do we add that into the analysis? Well, the key step is we can do some what-if analysis, we can run some simulations, etc. And we'll do a bunch of solved models on those. We'll look at the profit model, the pricing markdown, and make buy decisions, all with an element of uncertainty. Last, we'll take a look at modeling with the analysis solver package that we have for the course. And what that'll allow us to do is that'll allow us to analyze the uncertainty of multiple parameters. So what if we want to know that we're uncertain about more than one or two parameters? What if we want to do sensitivities? What if we want to know what happens if all my parameters go up or down by 10%? What's the impact on my revenue or my customer satisfaction or my earnings, depending upon what our model is? So we'll do that example with a profit model, and we'll also show you how to do some interesting visualization of the sensitivities so it's easy to present to folks. So with this in the playlist is all the solved Excel examples. Any questions, let me know.